Welcome everyone to today's webinar. I'm Aaliyah Pavla with Becker's Hospital Review. We will begin today's webinar with a presentation, and we'll have time at the end of the hour for a question and answer session. You can submit any questions you have throughout the webinar by typing them into the Q&A box you see on your screen. We look forward to hearing your questions. This session is being recorded and will be available after the event. You can use the same link you used to log into today's webinar to access the recording. At this time, it's my pleasure to start today's webinar by introducing our keynote presenters. Paul Bonopane, who is the performance improvement expert at ABBYY. Paul is a results-driven professional with over 20+ years of progressive responsibilities, primarily focused on managing complex revenue cycle and business operations. He has significant experience developing business strategies and plans to achieve targeted financial and strategic objectives, and has held positions at management consulting firms such as Deloitte Consulting and holds a Six Sigma Black Belt. Prashant Karamachandi is the director at the Chartis Group. Prashant is a director with Chartis in the revenue cycle practice. He has over 18 years of experience combining revenue cycle, strategic planning, business intelligence, technology, and healthcare consulting expertise to provide innovative solutions required to enhance business and technical operations, accelerate revenue growth, and produce actionable change. He is a certified project management professional, a fellow with the Healthcare Finance Management Association, a certified revenue cycle representative, and a Six Sigma Green Belt. At this time, I am pleased to turn the floor over to Matt to begin today's presentation.
Thanks, Aaliyah. Hi, everyone. My name is Matt Williams. I'm one of the healthcare specialists here at ABBYY, and I'll be facilitating today's webinar. We're excited to be presenting to you today on this important topic. Revenue cycle has always presented some unique challenges within healthcare. Now with COVID, we're seeing these issues being put under a microscope. Every cent counts when revenues are down. On top of that, you have the added complexity of managing a remote workforce. We're going to be talking here in a minute about ABBYY's unique solution to process improvement within the revenue cycle. But before we do, I'd like to hear from our keynote speakers. Paul, let's start with you. Can you share some specific challenges you're seeing within the revenue cycle that we can tackle right now?
Thanks, Matt. Let's talk about the billing and insurance-related costs. A $469 billion problem that continues to be a challenge. I remember back in 2014, 2015, administrative simplification came into the market, and there was a lot of buzz because of all the EHR transformation that was happening. And in that transformation, the data that exists in these core systems for claims was readily available. However, it looks like that hasn't really set in. And the reason why is, if you look at process, it's complex. We have people, we have processes and sub-processes, we have systems and outsources that are part of different day-to-day processes. And now we have bots and AI. And if you think of a typical revenue cycle process, it usually takes about 8 to 9 steps from when a patient account's created to pushing a claim out the door to getting paid or denied. And we've seen clients that have up to 296 steps. And on top of that, you have core system vendors, bolt-on vendors, AI and bots and outsources in the mix. If you go and count the number of revenue cycle vendors you have, my guess it's going to exceed 30. But even more importantly, if you go and count the number of reports you're using and dashboards to manage your rev cycle, I would bet it's about 150. And basically, this creates a giant spaghetti mess. And it gives us really low visibility into our revenue cycle health. And when we want to measure that health, we're either going to use a business analyst team or one of our lean Six Sigma teams to go and do investigation. Now, the traditional approach to basically look at that health is using dashboards and reports. And those dashboards and reports are great, and they tell you what's happening. So as a patient's moving through the revenue cycle or account's moving through the revenue cycle, it's collecting that data to multiple databases. And those databases are creating dimensional dashboards. I use the word dimensional because it's showing you a piece of the process. The problem is we want to string those together and see why things are happening, how they're happening. And the time to results to do that is slow and the cost is high. So, for example, if you think about, I want to see the true cost of my gross margin for an ambulatory visit, that requires your cost accounting system, your HR system, and a lot of connecting of data and a lot of analyst work to bring that together. Or if you want to look at how physicians are entering charges, a lot of us had to accelerate our EHR implementations. And, we have some issues with people following standards, but we also have some cystic config issues. So charging is one of those ones where you have two physicians that might practice the same specialty, let's say cardiology, but their views in the system for selecting the right preference list are different. Now, we don't really know that, and we've done a lot of cleanup work, but there's an opportunity to potentially clean up that. Or another example might be, and I hear this all the time in the revenue cycle, closing the books for the GL. So what is my patient cash receipt in my EHR? What's sitting in the GL? And what's in an agency? And as we start to look at that, we might have some dashboards and reports that tell the story, but what normally happens is we need to request another report or another piece of analytics, and that goes into a queue. And that work queue is either a day, a month, or potentially, a half a year to get your data. And with the revenue cycle and everything that's going on with COVID, we need to take action now. And one of the biggest challenges I see, I had this morning before this call, I sometimes forget I have a dog park outside my car. When we're trying to understand process and we have all these distractions at home around us, it's hard to really focus and zoom in. Never mind when we're doing the observations that we were doing before. So later in the presentation, we're going to basically address how Timeline approaches some of these issues. So I'm going to hand it back to Matt. Matt?
Great. Thanks so much, Paul. PK, I'd like to get your perspective. You've done numerous revenue cycle optimization projects, working at Chartis. You've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly. What do you think are some of the most pressing non-clinical challenges facing healthcare?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, with COVID has presented both several challenges, but I think some unique opportunities that organizations can take advantage of. And I think, you opened with some of the key highlights being there's a much larger scrutiny and pressure on margin management now more than ever. And then to add to that, you have to manage that remote workforce. And I think doing so, you need to be very, organized and structured. And if you think about what happened during the course of March and maybe even April, organizations were forced to pivot to this really quickly with no time or, without the luxury of having a good sound strategy to do that. And I think that's just creating more angst and anxiety within their environments. But, you fast forward to now, and some of those volumes that were pushed off are now starting to come back in. So pivoting that work environment, managing the pressures and the losses of what occurred, and trying to get back on the right footing is, really challenging for management, and it's also very challenging for staff. And I think, there's many things we could dive into regarding patient financial experience, things that are occurring there. But I think one thing we wanted to highlight today was, denials management. Now more than ever, we need to make sure organizations are capturing every dollar for every service provided, are collecting every dollar that is owed to them, and reducing the amount of rework along the way to do that. And I think, there's always been a conversation around denials management and how do we do it. And now more than ever, being very proactive, using the best data and intelligence you can to go after it is going to be crucial and critical. And, it all starts at the front end. And it's going to be, the intent of the group is really to, from that first contact we have with patients or with insurance companies, getting that information right. And now more than ever, you're going to have to do that with a laser focus.
Awesome. And I imagine, organizations aren't just sitting on their hands. They've kind of known about these challenges for a while, so they're working towards fixing these problems. How are organizations, from your perspective, addressing these challenges? And then have you witnessed any limitations to these traditional approaches?
Yeah, I think, oftentimes when we work with clients and, throughout my career, what I've seen is there are structures in place. You have, committees and groups assigned to look at your denials and some of your issues, but it's very retrospective. And you try and shift that work and become more proactive in what you're doing. And the tools and technology start to exist out there, and they're getting better and better each day. But I think, what ends up happening then is you're bogged down with the analytics and the analyses. The structures you've built start to fragment a bit as folks, deviate and start to work in their own areas on those improvements. And you lose some of that coordination. And I think that's one of the bigger challenges we find is, we know what our issues are. And, we know whether it's a payer issue or something we did that's self-inflicted. But the time it takes to not only research that and understand what it is, but to ultimately find the root cause, you've lost months at a time. And that was in an era where you could sit with your teams and sit with your staff and maybe do some observations. And that's going to be a big limitation today because in some cases you're not going to be able to do that anymore. And then I think additionally, along that same lines, you have organizations to create some of that leverage that are using, third-party vendors or outsourced vendors to help them, finding a better way to monitor performance, making sure they're compliant to the SLAs you put into place, and things like that are going to be very critical. I touched on the analytics a bit, and I think a lot of the analytics that folks look at, you'll look at your denial rate, what codes the payers are denying, whether it's a patient access issue or a coding issue or a billing issue. But again, it can be very retrospective at times. But those insights don't tell you what broke down or why did that happen. And, when we do our projects often at times, we'll sit there and talk to the management teams, talk to the staff, watch some of the workflow. For right now in this era, we can't do that, nor can their leaders do that. And I think, getting to that root cause information as soon as possible is the way you flip this and, become very proactive in addressing these issues and making sure the solutions you're putting into place are actually solving the problem.
Perfect. Thanks, PK. And then finally, can you maybe talk a little bit about how you got introduced to ABBYY and the timeline solution and, what were some of those results?
Yep. So we came across ABBYY at a mutual client of ours, and, we're doing a big revenue cycle transformation project. And, along those lines, one of the solutions is to reduce our denials and write-offs attributed to, insurance eligibility, authorization, and collecting that patient information in a timely manner. And the solution we put into place is, through a lot of great work with the client, to enable our schedulers to start to do that, both to collect that key information up front, but also to verify insurance at the time of scheduling. And as you can imagine, right, there's a lot of complexities in changing the workflow and addressing, the change management component of any types of issues related to the call or time that is added to the calls, et cetera. But, in order to do that, the first conversation, I've done this before with many clients, is, well, how do we make sure we're going to be compliant and what are we going to do? And, solutions that are often offered up are, let's go ahead and put in hard stops in the system, and that'll do it. Well, that has its own complexities and can cause challenges. Here we're making a process change. We're trusting that, the training and education that are being put in will hold. But how do we make sure the staff are actually following it? How do we hold them to be accountable to that? And how do we find issues quicker and get in front of that with training, education, or other support as needed? And in our experience, trying to do that from a reporting perspective has been very difficult. And, you can implement a solution, and by the time you really get good information, it's months later. So through the course of us thinking through that with the client, they had mentioned, ABBYY was there, your product. We sat down, we looked through it, and said, wow, this can actually help us identify breakdowns in this process much faster so we can get to the departments or the staff level with folks that are either not being compliant or need more training. But we can identify those issues a lot faster and not have to wait. And I think, the other thing that happened through the course of this was we were intending to pilot that solution in a few areas and roll it out through the course of Q1, Q2 of this year. COVID, made us accelerate some of that in a remote fashion, but we're more confident that we were able to do it because we have the reporting or the intel, I would say rather, to help us determine where we have issues much faster. And I think that built confidence within the team to accelerate that deployment. And I think that's been great. And we've seen, from pockets of it right now, and we're still, measuring a bit, but we've seen great compliance, both in terms of folks entering data, but also in actually verifying insurance at that time of scheduling for something that wasn't being done before. And now we're managing that all in a remote environment. So it's been, so far so good. Great wins under our belt, and we're hoping more comes out of it in the coming months.
That's great. Thank you so much. That was really insightful. So, Paul, let me turn it back to you. PK just gave us a preview of Timeline. Can you explain to our audience what Timeline is and how it's used?
Sure. Thanks, Matt. So, as I stated before, all the revenue cycle systems are creating data. And in that data, we are taking it and basically reconstructing the process automatically and exactly how it was performed. And what that means is, if you think about when we're doing assessments, we always fall to the 80-20 rule, 95-5, because we can't look at every transaction. We can't look at every step in the process. And we say, okay, we're going to say that these 5 departments in this specialty operate like this, or this charge is similar to this, or this modifier works this way, so we're going to just assume that they all work that way. By using data and reconstruction the processes, we can now get to that 99.9 and look at all transactions. And what's never been available to us and is now available is process analytics. And I spent a lot of time in consulting and doing a lot of assessments. And one of the challenges I always had was in doing observations that PK kind of touched on was I somehow need a technical skill to complete the last step. And what Timeline allows you to do by using that data and reconstructing those processes exactly how they perform, we can start to look at what is my process. I think I know what's happening, but is it really happening? How is it performing? Who's compliant? So PK touched on one of the clients we're working together, and it's interesting when you ask an end user or department supervisor, how do you think you're performing? And they say that, I think we're 95% compliant with our policies. And then you look at the data and you pull it in, you see that they're 75%. You say, what happened there? But the same thing with the outsourcers. As we continue to basically manage our business around COVID and we take on more outsourcers, how do we know that they're doing what we need them to do from an SLA standpoint? And then lastly, what is going on to happen in the future? So the ability to predict. And a lot of people are trying to get to the prediction before they set the foundation of what is the standard. So out of the box, what Timeline gives you, and I touched on this in one of my first slides, and you kind of heard this from PK, is skill sets that the end user didn't have. So if I go back to, I have a very complex question. So for those of you who have had to write a VLOOKUP or have an if-then question, or even in your dashboard tools filtered and got to a stopping point, well, what Timeline out of the box gives you is a skill set. We call it the SQL report writer, or the ability to query and ask very complex if-then statements. So I have a background in coding. I write VB and all that good stuff. And what I've been extremely surprised with is how detailed I can ask a question using the query function and get to that answer. And we'll demonstrate this in our demo today. So the skill sets you see below are complementers to your end user. And the key word that you heard from PK, and I want you to remember today, is time. Time to results. How do you accelerate time to results? So you can start asking those strategic design questions. And some of those strategic design questions are around, should we automate our processes? And we're doing a lot of great work, and I'm seeing a lot of good automation in the rev cycle, but I'm also seeing some failures. I had a call this week with a client that said they stood up all these bots, and one of their challenges is the insurance company changed the URL of the website and broke the bots, but they didn't have anything in place to monitor that. So now they're starting over from scratch. So sometimes bots are a great idea, but if they're isolated in one function, they might create more bottlenecks and more complexity down the road. So let's talk about how these skills are in action. So let's talk about data acquisitions. This is one of my favorite questions, and we can have a follow-up call to really get into it, but we can manage all vendors, right? You name a vendor, name a system, we can pull data from that system. But what we do really well, and is our differentiator, is we can connect the multiple vendors together to tell a story. And in the rev cycle, we want to tell that account story. So if you think of your EHR, your ERP, and your agency. So if you're looking at an account that started off for a patient, they went through your EHR, they went to your ERP, and some of your dollars are sitting at agency, well, wouldn't it be great to see that all in one view? We can do that. And we'll, again, demonstrate that today. And then once you get that data in, automatically, it's ready for the end user. So what we can then do is discovery analysis. We like to put it into two simple buckets, things we know but we want to validate, and things we don't know. So let's talk about things we know what we want to validate. Everyone on this phone is probably an expert in the revenue cycle. You know what's supposed to happen, whether it's a check-in function, it's a provider entering charges, or entering modifiers, or adding modifiers to account, or doing the coding process, or even in the claim cycle. We know what the standard processes are, but we want to validate that our end users are doing that. So in Timeline, we have a feature called Protocol that allows us to do that, to really set, call it the best practice, call it the happy path, but to look at what's supposed to happen, and immediately by clicking a button, do a rapid assessment of the health of that process. So the piece that used to take me 4 to 6 weeks to get to through all those cohorts using 80-20 rule, I can now click a button and do that analysis in an hour. And then the other piece of that is things we don't know. So we go into a process, it's a new process, we're not sure exactly what's happening. We have the ability to process analytics. So using that query function that I mentioned to dive into bottlenecks, variations, but also to look at costs. How much does it cost for a process? So how much does it really cost to verify an account? So if you think of a scheduler that collects that information, launches an eligibility check, and let's say you have your financial clearance person that does another eligibility check, and then you have a batch job that does an eligibility check, and then a check-in. How much does it really cost to verify that verification? Timeline allows you to get down to that. And in healthcare, we're averaging about 1 to 4 hours to bring back those analytics. So you've done all this great work, and I'm sure all of you have been part of lean teams or projects, and you go out, you train your end users, or you reconfigure your system, everything's great, and you're looking at your dashboard reports, but you really can't get to that behavior monitoring, and that's what we really need to get to. So it's either a people behavior issue or a system issue. And what Timeline allows you to do is that real-time behavior. So one of the clients we're working with, we were talking about collecting patient and insurance information at point of scheduling. Well, that's great. We trained them, but how do we monitor that we're doing? So we have the ability to set up real-time as 1 hour, 1 day, 1 week. It really depends on the use case that drives real-time. I realized in healthcare, real-time means something different to everyone. And then lastly, we're not going to touch on this today, but we have the ability to predict. And again, I just want to mention all out of the box. There's no coding. There's no configuration. Once that data is loaded, you get all these process analytics. And I haven't seen this out there, but the ability to do self-service machine learning, it's really impressive. So basically, you can configure the system and then train to potentially predict the outcome. So what we want to do today is, I'm sure you don't want to hear me talk all the time, but we want to show you a case. We want to show you a demo. We're not going to lead us. And it's what we're calling front-end denial scheduling. Now, this use case could be used across the revenue cycle, but we're just going to focus on front-end denials. And basically, the problem was front-end denials are increasing due to people not collecting that patient insurance information. There's enterprise policies in place, but there's really no way to measure compliance and to see what some of the risks are. So we're looking at 9 departments, 21 schedulers, 32,000 patients. And this goes back to, we're looking at every transaction that happened in 142 days. So we're not cutting corners, doing 80-20 rule, any of that. And then we're also monitoring those outsources because of financial challenges. Clients are doing more and more outsource, whether it's all outsourced or hybrid, where you're basically bringing some resources in. And what we can do is we can see how they're performing to how our people are performing, and did we make the right decision? So for the use case, we're going to show kind of the initial results. So we're going to look at compliance, insurance not verified. The group's up to 88% now. When we first started this journey, they didn't really know what that percent was. And I think you heard PK say it could take a lot of digging around in the system to find it. or stringing a bunch of dashboard reports. So the goal is 95%. We'll also show you the ability to go down to that end user and see what their baseline is. I think what's really interesting to all of you will be the denial cost. So the ability to look at how much does it actually cost for us to work a denial, or how much does it actually cost to schedule an appointment? How much does it cost to verify an appointment? We have the ability to do that, and we can go down to that next level to say, well, based on this scheduler scheduling this appointment and not completing it, what are the potential implications from a denial rework? And then we'll touch on this briefly, but one of the things we're finding is, as you set up your EHRs, you make a lot of decisions. Sometimes we don't know the implications of those decisions. So we create a lot of batch jobs and queues. But when's the last time you checked to make sure that they were working correctly? And what's that costing your system? And is it making you charge more or using more services of your eligibility or clearinghouse vendor? And is that expensive from your contract? I know there's some unlimited contracts out there, but they're far and few between. So are you spending 23 cents per transaction or 8 cents? And that tends to add up. And then lastly, we'll talk about the outsourcing. And Renat will point out how they're doing, how they're performing. But more importantly, it's one thing to say, okay, you're performing at 90%. Each one of your people are performing at this rate, and this is unacceptable. And it creates a discussion point, and you have the evidence-based data to go have that discussion. So I'm going to hand it over to Renat. Renat, if you want to grab the ball, we'll go from there. Thanks.
Thank you, Paul. Hi, everyone. My name is Renat Zalo. I'm in customer enablement here at ABBYY, and today I'll be playing the role of a business analyst who has been asked by the CFO to do some investigation into our front-end denial. So the CFO, she pulled me into her office and she showed me a denials dashboard that you're seeing on your screen, and it's a denials dashboard that she tracks on a weekly basis. And she told me two things. One is she is seeing an uptick in front-end denials at our organization, and while she sees that it's a trend going upwards, she doesn't know why or how it's happening, so she wants me to investigate that. And then the second thing she told me is that we recently hired an outsource team to handle some of that front-end work for us. And so she wants to know, how is that outsource team performing relative to our internal team? So those are the two big areas of investigation that I need to do. And traditionally, what I would do is I would go into our EHR, I would run a bunch of reports, I would go and shadow people, I would conduct interviews, and then collect all that information and present my findings to the CFO. However, there's really two problems with that. One is, as Paul and PK mentioned, the time to results of that traditional methodology is slow and the cost is high. And the second problem is that in today's world with COVID, my ability to go and monitor people and interview them and shadow them is limited. And so I need a way to do that type of analysis in a more digital way. And so today we're going to be showing you that alternative way to do this kind of analysis. So in our denials dashboard, we are going to go into denials that are done by the central scheduling office. And the reason we're focusing on the central scheduling office is that that's where the majority of the front-end work is done at our organization. So I'm going to click on Show Timelines. And what you're going to see is on the left over here, we have 32,779 accounts that, or patients that our organization saw over a span of 6 months. And out of those 32,000 accounts, 5,000 of them had denials. And so what you're seeing over here in the middle are these horizontal bars. And each bar represents a patient account from start to finish. So from the time the account was scheduled all the way through to when a denial was received. And if we double click on any one of these accounts, what we're going to see is here's the account number, 125878, and here's that detailed information of that account flow. So this account was scheduled on February 8th at 1:47 p.m., and it was scheduled by Deb Ford, and her supervisor is Todd Morgan, and it was scheduled for pediatrics. And then all the other steps that happened in this account's life cycle as it went through our organization. So there was a patient verification of the account, the patient then checked in, there was a point of service collections, a checkout, and then the rest of the revenue cycle steps that eventually culminated in a denial. And as you can see over here, the denial reason code is 31, patient cannot be identified as our insured. So that's the underlying data that we're pulling out of the system to populate this tool. Now, I could do this for each one of the accounts listed here, but obviously that would take quite a while. So what I want to really focus on is, who are the people who are part of this process, a part of these accounts? And what I'm interested really in is my schedulers. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select my schedulers over here. And what I'm seeing is the breakdown of schedulers for these accounts. And what it's telling me right now is that Earl is accounting for 56% of these accounts that are leading to a denial. And there's 2,932 of them. And that to me is a big red flag because that's a big volume for one person to take on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start to see, well, what's going on with these accounts when Earl is touching them. So I'm going to click on Earl. I'm going to hit apply. And now I'm just focusing on the 2,932 accounts that Earl is responsible for. So what I'm going to do is there's 20 plus pre-configured modules over here on the right. I'm going to go into this module called Path. And what Path allows me to see is the account workflow as that account goes through our organization. And what I'm seeing here is that 51% of these accounts, when Earl touches them, go through this flow. And so the account goes through scheduling, it goes through patient verification, it goes through check-in, and then the rest of the steps, and then ultimately ends in a denial. However, what I'm seeing here, or what I'm not seeing here to be exact, is insurance verification. So I see that Earl, when he's scheduling that patient, he's verifying the patient's demographic information, but he's not verifying the patient's insurance. And so what that's starting to make me wonder is, well, okay, Earl is one person at our organization, but really is this something that's a bigger problem at our organization? Are there other schedulers other than Earl who are not running insurance verification for these accounts? And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all of my data. I'm no longer focusing on Earl. I'm now just looking at all of my accounts. And what I want to do is I want to write a query. And a query is just is an if-then statement. So what I want to know is give me all of my accounts where there was no insurance verification. So I'm going to select insurance verification here. And I'm going to say this insurance verification should not happen. So give me all accounts where there was no insurance verification. And I'm going to click search. And what I'm seeing is that on 11% of our patient accounts, or 3,921 accounts out of our 32,000 accounts that we service, there is no insurance verification. And in addition to that, I'm also seeing all of the ways that our accounts flow when there is no insurance verification. And as I'm looking through these 4 ways that these accounts flow, what I'm noticing is that all of these flows end up in a denial. And that to me is telling because when we're not running insurance verification on our patients, we are receiving a denial. So that's something that needs to be fixed. And as a business analyst, I know that we recently went through a training exercise with our schedulers to make sure that they verify insurance. So it could be the case that the training was so recent that people who are the schedulers who are not following or not verifying insurance. And once again, what I'm seeing is Earl. Earl is responsible for 39% of these accounts, or 1,514 accounts. But in addition to Earl, what I'm seeing is, Deb, Christy, Ruth, Marta, they're also not verifying that insurance. So what this is telling me is that we as an organization need to do a better job of training our schedulers and our staff to verify insurance at point of scheduling. So one of the recommendations I'll be making to my CFO is that we need to either retrain them or somehow supplement that training that we've already given them. Now, what we've just done is we've identified a problem, which is that schedulers are not verifying insurance. We've identified the people who are part of this problem. Earl, Deb, Christy, Ruth, they're the ones that are responsible for not doing this. The next step is for me to put together a business plan or a business case to say, well, if we fix this problem, what's that going to be worth to us? And so what I can do is I can go into this bottleneck feature over here, and I'm going to select the cost of event analysis. And what I'm seeing is that a denial costs our organization, on average, $128. And that includes direct and indirect costs, as well as the cost of reworking that denial. However, for these 11% of accounts that we're seeing here, that denial cost should be zero, because if we're verifying the insurance, we should not be receiving a denial. We're going to put this cost to zero, and what I'm seeing is that as an organization, in a half a year, we can save around $500,000. So if we annualize that, that's about $1 million in cost savings, direct and indirect, that we can utilize as an organization. So that, to me, is a really good business case. That's something that I can present to my CFO to say, hey, look, we've identified a problem. Schedulers aren't verifying insurance. We've identified the schedulers who are doing it, so we can train them. And then here's the amount of money that we can save if we put in this cost-saving measure. Now, the next step for us would be, once we've identified all of this, it would be to actually go out and train these schedulers again, right? Either retrain them or augment the training they've already had. But as we know from experience, some of those trainers or some of the schedulers are going to slide back to their old habits. So they're going to go through the training and then not verify insurance. And that's something that we want to make sure is not happening. So what we can do is we can set up an alert to monitor that scheduler behavior. And so what we've done is we've set up an alert called non-compliance insurance verification policy. And what this alert basically does is, as data is flowing from our systems into the tool, when the tool sees that an account does not have an insurance verification, what it's going to do is it's going to fire off an alert. And that alert can either be a text message or it could be an email to go and notify somebody, maybe the scheduling supervisor, to say, hey, we just trained Earl to verify insurance, and Earl didn't verify the insurance at point of scheduling. Now, in addition to this alert verifying somebody, notifying somebody using SMS and email, or text message and email, what we can do is we can also set up a webhook to an RPA robot. So if we as an organization have created a bot, an RPA bot, to go and verify insurance, what we can do is we can go and kick off that insurance bot to go and verify the patient's insurance when this alert is triggered. So that way, this is a fail-safe for us to know that that patient's insurance will be verified. So that's our first finding. The next thing that I want to take a look at is, we've just taken a look at insurance verification, so we're going to go back to our accounts, our account view. So here we have all 32,000 accounts that represent our total patient volume for those 6 months. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the insurance verification event. And when I do that, what I'm seeing is that insurance verification is done between 0 and 5 times per patient account. Now, as we just saw, we just went through the 3,921 accounts that have no insurance verification, right? And we saw that those accounts ended up in denials. So we've already addressed that issue. What I'm also seeing is that there's some accounts that have more than one insurance verification. And in fact, at most, they have 5 insurance verifications. So this is something that's of interest to me. So I'm going to slide this left slider to the right. and focus on all accounts that have more than one insurance verification. And I'm going to hit apply. So what I'm seeing is that 13% of our total accounts, or 4,373 of our patient accounts, had more than one insurance verification on their account. And once again, right, I want to take a look at, well, who's doing these insurance verifications? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to breakdown, and I'm going to select my verification user to take a look at who's verifying these insurances. And these are the results that I'm getting. So what I'm seeing here are two things. One is 50% of those extraneous insurance verifications is being done by the interface. So what this is telling me is that something in our interface, which is our batch job that does insurance verification, something's broken there. We need to go to our IT team to make sure that that batch job is set up correctly. And that's accounting for 50% of our total extraneous insurance verifications. So that's telling me a problem. The next thing I'm seeing is, in addition to the interface, I'm also seeing that, Earl, Dave, Deb, Marta, Lorraine, they're also responsible for some of these extraneous insurance verifications. So once again, right, this tells me that we need to improve our training for these schedulers and insurance verification users to make sure that they're only running that insurance verification when it's absolutely necessary. So we've identified another problem, which is that insurance verification is done too many times. We've identified the sources of this problem. One is our interface is set up incorrectly, and two, there's some training issues. And the next piece that we can do, once again, is create a business case to say, well, if we fix these issues, what's the ROI for us as an organization? So we're going to go back to bottleneck, and we're going to select our cost of events. And what I'm seeing is that our insurance verification contract, per insurance verification, we're paying 25 cents to our vendor. But for these 13%, once again, right, this cost should be zero. We should never have a second, third, fourth, fifth insurance verification. So if I put this cost to zero, what I'm going to see is that we as an organization can save about $4,000 every half year, or about $8,000 a year in just insurance verification costs alone. Now, some of you may be asking, well, these accounts, some of them might require more than one insurance verification. It's not always the case that an account only needs one insurance verification. So what we can do is we can start to take a look at, well, what's happening in those accounts. We're going to go into this interval. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, well, how much time on average is between our insurance verification and the patient's check-in, or the time that the patient is scheduled for? And what I'm saying is that on average, it takes 15 days and 8 hours for us between when the insurance is verified to when the patient checks in. And at the smallest amount, it's 9 days. That's the minimum. And the maximum is 21 and a half days. So what that's telling me is insurance verification is usually verified 30 days out. And so if we're doing that insurance verification and the maximum that we've scheduled the patient out is 21 days, then in fact, we should not be verifying insurance more than once. So the business case that I'm putting in front of my CFO for reducing these extraneous insurance verifications is valid. So just to recap real quickly, we've identified a problem that insurance verification is done 0 times, and we've identified the people who are part of that, and we've identified the ROI for that fix. We've also identified some issues where insurance verification is done too many times, and so we've identified who's responsible for that, which is the batch job, as well as some schedulers and insurance verification users at our organization. And we've identified the ROI for fixing that problem as well. The last step is for me to address the question that my CFO had about the outsource compliance. So what I'm going to do is, once again, I'm going to go into all of my accounts. And what I'm going to see is how many of these accounts were worked by the outsource team. So we're going to go to breakdown, and we're going to select the team that worked that account. And what I'm seeing is that 95% of all of these accounts were worked by our internal team, or about 30,867 accounts. And 6% of our total volume, or 1,912 accounts, were worked by that outsourced team. So what I want to do is I want to focus on these outsourcers. I'm going to hit apply. And once I've hit my outsourcers, what I want to know is how well are these outsourcers complying to the service level agreements that we've set with them in our contract. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to protocol. And what we have here is just a simple rule set of how we expect all of our staff, whether they're internal or outsourcers, to follow an account. So what we want them to do is we want them to schedule an account, to verify insurance, and then to verify the patient's demographic information. That's our rule set. That's what we want them to do. And what I can do is, now that I've selected all of the accounts that were worked by outsourcers, I can see, well, how well do those outsourcers follow this best practice that we have defined as an organization. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on Show Violations over here. And what I get is a digital assessment of how well those outsourcers comply to this best practice that we have set up. And what I'm seeing is that there's some violation types. There's a missing step, which means this step was never done. There's a wrong count, which means this step was done too many times, etc. And really, I want to focus on these first two. What I'm seeing is that insurance verification step was missing in 10% of our timelines or our accounts. So what that tells me is that 10% of the time when an outsourced team member touches an account and schedules an account, they don't verify insurance. And below that, what I'm seeing is at the same time, 13% of the time, or almost 14% of the time, this outsourced team is verifying insurance more than once, which is not compliant to the policy that we have set as an organization. And after reviewing the contract that that we signed with this outsource vendor, both of these numbers in the contract were stated to be 5% or less. So what that's telling me is the outsourcer are not meeting our level of SLAs that they have agreed to in their contract. And that's a finding that I'm going to bring back to my CFO to make sure that we, either renegotiate the contract, pay a lower fee because they're clearly not meeting the expectation of the contract, or to provide them some information about, well, what's going on, why are your staff members, your outsourcers, not following the SLAs that we have set, and potentially bring this up to the outsourcers so that they can do a better job. But what I really want to do is I want to dive deep a little bit deeper. So from that outsourced team, I want to identify, well, who are the people in that outsourced team who are doing this? So what I see is that there's 4 outsourced team members. There's Dave, Gerald, Letitia, and Shayla. And what I want to know is, for each one of these schedulers, for each one of these outsourcers, how well are these outsourcers complying to our rule set? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to compare them. Give me 1 second. Let's go to protocol one more time. And let's apply this filter of insurance verification. So give me all accounts touched by this outsourcers that had no insurance verification. Let's go back to breakdown. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to compare these outsourcers to all of their accounts. And what I'm seeing is their performance relative to each other. So what I'm seeing is Dave doesn't do insurance verification 11% of the time. And out of the 865 accounts that he scheduled, he didn't verify insurance on 94 of them. And so forth for Letitia, for Gerald, and for Sheila. And what I'm seeing is Sheila is actually, out of the outsourcers, she's the best performer. She doesn't verify insurance 9% of the time. So 91% of the time, she's compliant to our policy. So just to recap what we did, we identified a problem with our insurance verification. The first problem was that our outsourcers, as well as our internal team, were not verifying insurance, and that was leading to denials such as, denial code 31, the patient cannot be identified as our insured. We identified the people who are part of that process, and we identified the ROI of going out to train them. And we also found a way to monitor their behavior once they were trained. We also identified a problem where insurance verification was done too many times. And we identified the people who are part of that. We identified that there was some system issues with the desk job that was set up. And we also identified the ROI of fixing that problem. And finally, what we found was that the outsource team that we hired was actually not meeting their service level agreements as stated in our contract. And we can actually even go down to the scheduler level to say, per scheduler, here's how compliant these outsourcers are to the SLAs that we've signed. So I'm going to collect all these findings, and I'm going to create a nice PowerPoint presentation for my CFO summarizing this information, and I'm looking forward to presenting this information to the CFO. And in addition to that, I'm also really looking forward to the next project that she gives me, because it's an opportunity for me to use this tool to start to find additional ROI for my organization. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to Matt Williams.
Great. Thanks so much for that demonstration, Renat. I'm impressed by how quickly you're able to see how certain steps, like insurance verification, impact that process outcome. There's just so much you can learn if you just simply understand how your processes are being executed. So that does it for the content portion of our webinar. I'd like to thank our audience for attending and ABBYY for sponsoring this event. If you're not familiar with ABBYY, we're a digital intelligence company. We provide a digital intelligence platform that delivers a complete understanding of your business. You can't improve what you can't measure, as the old adage goes. So get to know your processes before you start any optimization or digital transformation project. Thank you. I'll now hand this back to Beckers for our Q&A.
Thank you, Paul, PK, Matt, and Renat, for that fantastic presentation. We will now begin today's question and answer session. Please submit any questions you have for our panelists by typing them into the Q&A box you see on your screen. We will try to get through as many questions as we have time for. So that said, I'd love to jump right into the audience questions. And the first one I have for our panelists today is, how do you feed data into the system?
Paul, do you want to take that one?
Sure. So Timeline out of the box has an ETL platform. So if you look at any of your EHR vendors or ancillary systems or bolt-ons, and that could be a payment bolt-on or some other charge scrubber that you have, basically we can extract data from that system, bring it into our ETL, and transpose it and bring that into the tool and get to immediate analytics. So I think one of the challenges, and I've been on both sides of this as a employee of Partners Healthcare and the consulting space, one of the challenges we had was we've asked IT to not only extract that data, but essentially to transpose it as well, and that took significant time. So on average in healthcare, we're averaging about 30 minutes to 2 hours to get the data out of the system. Back to you.
Thanks, Paul. So the next question I have is, wouldn't you want to confirm the type of denials rather than assume it's only due to lack of insurance verification? And Renat, could you grab this one?
Yeah, absolutely. So that is a good point. That is definitely something that we would want to do. But the thing with this tool is it allows us to get to that deep analysis, right? So if we wanted to confirm that those are the denials caused by a specific denial code, we can go ahead and do that using the query function. So we can get down to the nitty-gritty detail of, what's the denial code, how did the denial happen, what was the account steps that led to that denial. So we can definitely do that type of analysis.
Great. Thank you for clarifying that for our audience member. The next question I have for you all is, can you overlap this with other software? And Paul or Renat, can you grab this one?
Yeah,
Sure.
yeah. So, Renat, you want to start? And I'll just add on. Go ahead.
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Paul. So from a technical perspective, what we can do is, you saw the modules that we showed you today, and what we can do is we can embed each one of those modules, or all of them, into your existing BI dashboard. So what you would have is, you would have your, let's say, denials dashboard using your BI tools right alongside this timeline analysis that allows you to dive deep into the process of, well, why did those denials happen?
And just to add to that, it's again one of our differentiators that we can easily integrate into the core tech stacks of healthcare. So it's use case driven on how you want to use that, but it's definitely something we're working with our clients on in the industry.
Totally. Thank you both so much. The next question that I have is, in these times of financial difficulties, how much does ABBYY charge for small practices?
Yeah, this is Matt. I think I could take that one. So we have flexible tiers based off of the number of processes we're analyzing. So we work with organizations of all sizes. I would recommend that you reach out to the ABBYY sales team, either via our website, to kind of explore what exactly you would be looking to do. And I think that actually refers, I think that same person had a separate kind of related question of whether we had to purchase any hard or soft software to connect with our system. And the answer is no. So we can take direct data feeds from your core systems, whether it be your EMR, your ERP system, and put that right into ABBYY. So it runs on the cloud or on-prem. We can take that data and put that right into our system. So it's a standalone purchase from that regard.
Great. Thanks, Matt. Another question that I have for you all is, how does the ABBYY timeline account for a system like Epic that shares data between multiple accounts for the same patient?
So this is actually a great question. And, one of the challenges we have in healthcare is we have multiple systems. We have patient journeys moving through our EHR and then continue on to ancillary systems as well as remote monitoring. So our ability to find an ID to link, to join those together, whether that's a patient ID, it could be as simple as a zip code. If you wanted to see a patient going back into the community, you want to tie census data. For this specific example, we can bring all that data together to show you that end-to-end journey. And we've done that. So we've done Epic, Cerner, we've done Epic, Cerner, Meditech, Allscripts, all as one journey of that patient. Because I know a lot of the health systems have complex architecture. And again, it's one of our key differentiators in the market, the ability to bring that together and to show you automatically what's happening in your processes.
Thank you so much for clarifying that as well. It looks like we have time for about one more question before we hit the top of the hour. So just for clarification's sake, can you discuss what systems you have already integrated with?
Sure. So all your core EHR vendors, a lot of your bolt-ons across the rev cycle. We're doing some really interesting use cases in the surgery space. So the ability to actually see what's happening in your operating room, and not only to see what's happening in your operating, but the team that's assigned. So, again, the way Timeline was built, it's vendor agnostic. So pulling data in from those systems is relatively easy. What really drives it is the use case that you're trying to solve for. And we're happy to have that conversation as we go. But, just in the revenue cycle, I think we've identified, I think it was 500 plus processes that Timeline can be used for. And based on working with our clients, we've done about, I think, 62 across some of those core vendors that we'd be happy to discuss and share some of those outcomes.
Great. Thank you so much. That is all the time we have for today. I want to thank Paul, PK, Matt, and Renat for that excellent presentation, and Abby for sponsoring today's webinar. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we look forward to having you join us for future webinars.